What's up everyone? Today I have a lot of exciting token generators. This video idea is thanks to a comment left by MadMotormouth7579. Thanks so much for commenting and for this fun idea. I've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to start first with the honorable mentions, which were a little too popular to go in depth in this video, so I'll just share some of my favorites. One is Stridehanger Automaton, which is in 36,927 decks. This is awesome in pretty much any deck that can create treasures, clues, food, or any other artifact token, because when you go to create one of those, you also create a Thopter, which is a very relevant creature. Another card is Rite of the Raging Storm, which creates a 5/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste on each player's turn, and those cannot attack you. So it's pretty much creating like a 5/1 goated creature, and the idea is everyone swinging at each other. Hopefully they don't collude to not attack each other, but even then, I mean, like a 5/1 smasher on each of your turns is still pretty nice. Homunculus Horde is another one of my favorites. This is like a Scoot Swarm, but for draw decks, and I love it. You know, I think that I play this in quite a few of my decks, and it's always just so much fun. For anyone who has played this, I'm curious, how big is the biggest horde you have ever created with this card? And our last honorable mention is Nemada Primeval Warden, which is in about 28,600 decks. So as a commander, this only has 1,183 decks, which is kind of surprising to me because this just goes insane with any edict effect or board wipe, because Nemada creates a token for each creature that an opponent controls that died, or rather got exiled with its effect. It doesn't specify non-token creatures, so this is just crazy good if you ask me. But yeah, before I jump into the cards, if I'm successfully able to convince you to buy any of the cards that I mentioned today, it wouldn't mean so much if you do consider buying them through my TCG player affiliate link in the description below. It helps support a small channel like mine more than you know. So thanks, and either way, I appreciate you being here. Our first card today that we're going to talk about is Spawning Pit, which is in 26,871 decks. This is a 2-mana artifact that says, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Spawning Pit. You can then pay 1 and remove 2 charge counters from Spawning Pit to put a 2/2 spawn artifact creature into play. So this one is actually an infinite sacrifice outlet that I don't really hear people talk about very often, because yeah, that first activated ability is sacrifice any creature to put a charge counter on it. So this can fit in literally any deck, which is pretty nice. It also uses charge counters, which is relevant for a lot of decks that, you know, charge counters, they proliferate them, and a lot of them can switch between cards. So that is a relevant counter. And also just, you know, paying 1 to create a token at instant speed that is a 2/2 artifact creature token is pretty nice. The nice part about that as well is it's not just a creature token. It is a creature and an artifact, which are both very relevant types when it comes to ETB effects that are synergistic with other cards. So things that care about when a creature enters, or also when another artifact enters, which there's several of those in many different colors. And so I really like this card, both for the infinite sacrifice outlet, but also if you get 10, 15, you just remove 1 whenever you want to, or remove 2 to create a token. Up next is Howling Moon, which is in 22,289 decks. This is an enchantment that costs 2 generic and a green and says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target wolf or werewolf you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. So yeah, I think when most people read this and they see this, they're like, oh, I'm not playing wolf, I don't have a werewolf deck, so this is not relevant to me at all. which I think is the big oversight that people see when they look at this card. Because yeah, it does specify wolf and werewolf, but it is also a pretty insane token generator. Like, you don't have to be in a dedicated wolf deck. This triggers on each turn, so it works well against control players, as opposed to if it said on their turn only, which is pretty common, where they're like, if it's the second spell that they've cast on their turn, which would highly nerf this card. But also, getting down on turn 3 and staying on the battlefield can net a lot of creatures over the next few turns, especially if you're able to get this on turn 3 while people are casting mana rocks and getting their foundational 1 and 2 drops or even cantrips into play over the next few turns. I think anyone who has ever played Lothal or Crom, they can attest to how often people actually cast their second spell in a turn. And what's nice is with all of the number of wolves that you are creating, it does have that at beginning of combat on your turn clause, so those creatures do get bigger, or at least one of them does. Our next card is Blight Mount, which is in 21,086 decks. This is a black card that costs 2 generic and 1 black for an enchantment, and it says, attacking pests you control get +1/+0 and have menace. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature. When this creature dies, you gain 1 life. So for a while, I was playing Dina Soulsteeper, and I became a huge fan of the 1/1 Strixhaven pests. These ones that give you 1 life when they die, because they can just synergize with so many life gain or drain strategies. You sacrifice one, you get some triggers from something like Blood Artist, that triggers Dina. You gain 1 life, which triggers anything else that drains someone when you lose life, and so it can just stack and do so many awesome things. This is an enchantment as well, so it is a lot more sturdy than if it were a creature. It's a lot more sturdy when it comes to board wipes, etc. And this is also nice because it says whenever a creature, not whenever 1 or more creatures die, or, this only triggers once each turn, which are both clauses that I feel like are getting printed a lot more often. So this is a pretty good card for protecting your board against wipes. I guess not protecting, but at least ensuring that you get more creatures on the board in response to that. The Anthem is also underrated as well. Like, having 2/1 attackers with menace can add up over time. And black-green, that's another nice stat line that this is mentioning. So this works with cards like Savra, Queen of the Golgari, who cares about the color of the creatures you sacrifice. So when you sacrifice one of these pests with Savra, you make each other player sacrifice a creature, and you gain 2 life, in addition to the 1 that this pest is already giving you. I remember, back in the day, I really wanted to make a Valentine Dean of the Vein deck, but I never actually got around to it. But reading this card, maybe that's something that I should try again. Our next card is Ulvenwald Mystery, which is in 17,934 decks. This is a 3-mana enchantment that costs 2 generic and 1 green, and it says, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So this card can create 2 types of tokens, either clues or human soldier tokens, which are both very relevant in today's day and age. Just like Blight Mount, it cares about non-token creatures dying and isn't restricted by a whenever 1 or more clause or a once each turn clause. So both of these effects are pretty nice to have stapled onto a sturdy enchantment. This will always make a clue token a 2-for-1 at a minimum. You pay 2 to draw a card and create a creature. That's pretty nice. Or it can even get better in commanders that care about sacrificing things. So like in Corvold, you sacrifice a clue to put a counter, a +1/+1 counter on Corvold, draw a card, and create a token. I also feel like this could somewhere have some sort of infinite loops, but I've never actually looked into that because I don't run loops. And either way, this is, like I said, just great to have an enchantment on the field with 2 whenever clauses that are both equally strong and can be built around. Our next card is Iridescent Horn Beetle, which is in 16,393 decks. I do realize kind of these first cards are kind of green heavy, but we will get to other colors. But yeah, this is a 5-mana creature that costs 4 generic and 1 green. For an insect, it says at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each +1/+1 counter you've put on creatures under your control this turn. Like, what? That is insane. For each +1/+1 counter? Yes, this is 5 mana, which maybe that's why it's so unpopular. It's only in 16,000 decks, but one single activation from this card can just be game changing. Looking at the commanders playing this, the card or the commander playing it the most is Azuri Claw of Progress. What I'm talking about that gets to just really insane levels is cards that put counters on creatures either when they enter or on all creatures that you control. So Ouroboros is one that came out recently. It puts X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control at the beginning of combat on your turn, equal to its power. So if you had like 10 tokens or 10 cards and you put just 1 counter on each of them, that's 10 tokens that Horn Beetle is going to create at the end of your turn. This in a Renata Call to the Hunt deck could also go insane with any token generator. You know, like a Scoot Swarm or Avenger of Zendikar. That's like 7 creatures that get counters put on them. Or we could make that even crazier, jumping up to 21 with something like Tribute to the World Tree in play, which puts 2 counters on creatures with power 2 or less that enter. So yeah, I think that this is just a really insane card. It could be in something like Selesnya Go Wide decks with a card like Requisition Raid. All you have to do is put 1 +1/+1 counter on your wide board, and you're going to be making it that much wider. So that is my main issue with this card, is it is a win more card because you need to already be doing your thing. But if you are doing your thing, this can really lead to some blowouts and a large amount of creatures. Our next card today is Thopter Fabricator, which is in 15,647 decks. This is a 3-mana artifact vehicle that costs 2 generic and 1 blue. It's 4/4 flying and says, whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, and it has crew 2. So I've played this in several of my decks. I'm always happy to have this on the board. It's really nice. Yes, it does have to be in a deck that cares about drawing, but for decks that do draw a lot, or even just reliably on your turn, I think it's still just worth it to me. Having flying token blockers is enough to dissuade a lot of big attackers who are just looking for a free attack. I think most people can probably attest to this. They have a big flyer and they just look and ask, all right, who has a flyer, who doesn't, and then they attack the open board. And so even having 1 or 2 flying Thopter tokens is enough to get someone to swing at your opponent instead. I've also been able to catch a lot of people off guard because a lot of people forget that this is a vehicle just sitting there minding its own business in the corner, but it is a 4/4 flying body that can kill a lot of unsuspecting attackers. So yeah, it's a pretty simple card. If you are able to draw a lot, I like the tokens that this generates consistently each turn that I play it. This next one is one that I think is overlooked a lot. It's at knifepoint, which is in 14,860 decks. This costs 1 generic, 1 black, and 1 red for an enchantment that says, as long as it's your turn, outlaws you control have first strike. And whenever you commit a crime, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. This ability triggers only once each turn. So yeah, like I said, I think a lot of people read this and they immediately write this off as an outlaws only deck. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is awesome in those decks, but this is also just a crazy good, reliable token generator in any deck. What I think is really overlooked is people don't realize how easy it is to commit crimes for free on any turn. Blood Artist is a great example of this because it says target player loses 1 life whenever a creature dies and you gain 1 life. So in this case, let's say you sacrifice one of your mercenary tokens. You have things on the board like Bastion of Remembrance or any other death triggers that drain the whole board. And then you have Blood Artist, which targets a player. So you commit a crime. And by doing so, you create another mercenary token. The next turn rolls around. And again, you sacrifice a mercenary token. You target someone with your Blood Artist. By doing so, you create another mercenary token. And so by the time your turn rolls around, you have created and sacrificed 4 mercenary tokens, had a plethora of death triggers outside of Blood Artist death trigger, and it's just a really easy loop. This also works for cards like Falconwrath Noble and Vein Ripper 2, so it's not just Blood Artist. I learned how nice this card is in Vial Smasher Gleeful Grenadier deck that I'd made, but that's when I realized like how applicable it is in any deck. But I want to ask everyone, are there any other cards that you think people don't realize is so good at committing crimes? Because yeah, like I said, it's often easy to think, committing crimes, maybe I'll do that once a turn cycle, but there's a lot more cards out there than you think that can help you to create 1 token each turn with this on the board. Up next, we have Dragonlair Spider, which is in 13,177 decks. This is a 6 mana. It costs 2 generic, 2 red, and 2 green for a 5/6 spider with reach. And it says, whenever an opponent casts a spell, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. Okay, yeah, that is pretty good. It is a lot. 6 mana does cost a lot, but how many 1/1 insects do you think you would need to create in order for you to consider this worth it for 6 mana? Then my other question is, how big have you seen an Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker get? Like, this can get equally big, but instead of going tall, it just goes wide. So I think this card is pretty nice. Obviously, your opponents will be casting a lot of spells. And what is nice about this Dragonlair Spider is that the tokens are not scary. They're just 1/1 green insects. They don't have any abilities. They're not 2/2s. They're not 3/3s. So you're just kind of sitting there. Yeah, people do notice after they've cast 5, 6, 7 spells in a turn cycle. But like I said, they're just 1/1s. So a lot of the times I feel like this card can get overlooked until it's too late. You have a overrun, overpower the board. And also the Spider-Man set might get this to go up in price, but it only creates insects instead of spiders, so maybe not. Maybe this is one just to keep an eye out on. Next up, we have Elemental Mastery, which is in 13,080 decks. This costs 3 generic and red for an enchantment aura that says Enchant Creature. Enchanted Creature has tap, create X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste, where X is this creature's power. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Pretty straightforward ability. This scales with your board, and so if you have a lot of big creatures, then this can reliably create that many creature tokens every single turn. I think that, one, it has a lot of potential for synergy, so if you're playing in a deck that can also play Risen Reef, this is pretty wild because Risen Reef says whenever an elemental enters the battlefield, you can look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you put it onto the battlefield tapped. If not, you put it into your hand. So let's say in your deck you have a 5/5. You can tap it to create 5 elemental tokens and either ramp 5, draw 5, or any mixture in between. I also think that this is a really good card for the gods that are on the board as a creature but cannot attack until their requirement is met. So for example, Hazoret Godseeker is a 5/3 indestructible god for just 2 mana. But Wizards is fine with the stat line for a 2 mana creature because it cannot attack or block until you reach max speed, which the earliest possible you could do that is turn 1 if you have a way to get something down and ping the board, but most reliably turn 4 or 5. And so even though the gods say they cannot attack or block, does not mean that they cannot be tapped. And so you could play this on turn 4, tap, and create 5 1/1 creatures to then attack and help get your speed up. I think for any of the gods, I just mentioned Hazoret, but most of them have a pretty good stat line, but they're not able to attack, like I said, until their requirement is met. The same thing applies to other big creatures with downsides like Lupine Prototype, Slumbering Dragon, Relic Golem, and there's just so many more, where you have a 2 or 3 mana, 4, 5, 6 power creature that can't attack for some reason. Just slap on Elemental Mastery and they can tap themselves and create that many tokens every turn. It also goes infinite with several things. There's like Intruder Alarm, several creatures, and EDH Rec doesn't list Grim Corpse Reborn as one of the infinite combos, but I think, yeah, am I missing something? That should definitely go infinite. If you're enjoying this video, I'd love to invite you to join the Unpopular MTG Patreon, where we talk about underrated cards every single day, and it's just a great place to be if you want to break away from EDH Rec and play a lot of fun cards like these that no one ever really plays or talks about. Our next card is Angelic Sellsword, which is in 11,061 decks. This is a 5 mana creature. It costs 4 generic and 1 white for a 4/4 Angel Mercenary with Flying and Vigilance. It says, whenever Angelic Sellsword or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. Whenever Angelic Sellsword attacks, if its power is 6 or greater, draw a card. Okay, so this card has multiple text boxes, all of which are pretty good. Flying Vigilance is great. So having a 4/4 Flying Vigilance, check. Really good. Attacking and drawing a card for power 6 or more is also good. It enters and creates a body, great. And then also, this is able to create a lot of creature tokens. So this works in any Blink deck or deck getting a lot of non-token ETBs. I think it's a really good fit. Like I said, it also works for itself. So at the worst, this is 2 bodies for 5 mana, but it's almost always going to be more. And so as a consistent token generator, if you're getting a lot of non-token creatures onto the battlefield, then this just can go crazy. So let me know. This was in one of the precons. Let me know if you've ever played this. I've played the precon, but I've never actually been able to cast Angelic Sellsword when playing that precon, so let me know how it went if you were able to get that out. We have a few more. Up next is Aligned Heart, which is in 10,923 decks. This is a 3 mana enchantment that costs 2 generic and 1 white, and it says, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a rally counter on this enchantment. Then create a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess for each rally counter on it. So I already talked a little bit earlier in this video with Howling Moon about how easy it can be to cast 2 spells in a single turn. This time it's you who's doing the casting instead of your opponents. And so I think that this card is just really good even in decks that don't care a ton about getting multiple cast triggers. So you don't have to be in a dedicated Storm deck, but if you do, it just gets even more bonkers. This is a really good proliferation target. You just get that once and then you start proliferating, and then anytime you're able to get that second cast trigger, you could be creating 5, 6, 7 of these monk tokens, and these things are insanely strong. Like blocking any creature that has prowess when there's mana open is always scary, and so if you've ever played against these tokens, you can understand just how strong they can be. I'd even argue that if this card didn't say that it had that wild clause about creating a token for each rally counter on this, I still think as a standalone, this would still be a pretty good enchantment. And so the fact that this does have that scaling ability just makes it so much stronger. Our next card is Rapacious one, which is in 8,950 decks. This is a 6 mana Eldrazi drone that is 5/4 and has trample. It says, whenever Rapacious one deals combat damage to a player, create that many 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. They have sacrifice this creature, add 1 generic mana. I will say, I think this is one of the tougher requirements that we're talking about in this video, because this creature actually has to get through and it has to have haste. So I only think this, as a recommendation, is really good in a deck that is able to enable haste. If not, I think that's really steep cost, paying 6, not being able to attack this turn. But if you are able to have that haste enablement, 5/4 with trample is a pretty good stat line. It also goes well if you're able to create copies of this. So like I said, it's not for every deck, but I think it could be a really good performer in decks like Xenagos, God of Revels, or Ilhard the Razeboar, or even something like Zadahedron Grinder, which doesn't have that haste enablement in and of itself, but you're always casting cantrips that give haste to a lot of your creatures. And then if you get through, you create 6, 7, 8 Eldrazi tokens to then have those copies for next turn. Our next card is Tombstone Stairwell, which is an 8,152 dex. This is an enchantment that costs 2 generic and 2 black. It has cumulative upkeep, 1 generic, 1 black, and it says, during each upkeep, each player puts into play a Tombstone spawn token for each summon card in his or her graveyard. Treat those tokens as 2/2 black creatures that are unaffected by summoning sickness and count as zombies. At end of any turn, or if Tombstone Stairwell leaves play, bury all of these tokens. Okay, a few things. First of all, this card is pretty expensive. It's currently running at $31 for a heavily played copy. Second, it has cumulative upkeep, so this isn't for everyone. It's also symmetric, so that's not for everyone, meaning it benefits your opponents too, but we're here for the party and the chaos. You slot this in decks where you plan on being the biggest benefactor, either because your graveyard is going to be more full, you want a lot of tokens, or you want a lot of death triggers, regardless of who owns the creatures. Like Sephiroth Fabled Soldier, this is already the top played commander for the card, despite how recently Sephiroth came out. And although this is symmetric, like I said, most decks running this find ways to make you benefit more. So in the case Sephiroth I mentioned, or Kambal Profiteering Mare, who can create that many tokens every time your opponent does, or Sir Conrad the Grim, who cares about any creature dying, not just yours. And so you can get 4 or 5 death triggers on every opponent's turn as well. I'd love to hear if you've played this card before, how do you like it, and was it worth paying the cumulative upkeep? Alright, next we have Anafenza Unyielding Lineage, which is in 7,180 decks. This costs 2 generic and a white for a Spirit Soldier 2/2 that has flash and first strike. It says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, Anafenza endures 2. So you put 2+1/+1 counters on it, or create a 2/2 white spirit creature token. This card is sick, if you ask me. Endure is just such a good ability, in my opinion. I think it's just so much fun. You can either choose to go Voltron, or you can go wide. I pretty much will always pick the go wide, but it's also nice, like I said, for Voltron strategies. Anafenza itself only has 200 decks as a commander because it's mono white, but I think white has so much mass recursion, and there is enough colorless infinite sacrifice outlets that this commander could be insanely strong. And even if people don't see the potential in it as a mono white commander, this goes crazy in the 99 of Orzhov or other color combination decks. Just double up the death trigger with Teysa Karlov and be creating 2 tokens every time one of your creatures dies. I guess one of your non-token creatures. And not to mention, this has flash, so it can be you can build up a board of 2/2s in response to a board wipe. Okay, we have 2 left. Right now we have Acorn Catapult, which is in 4,571 decks, and that sounds like an Unfinity card, but no, this is legal. It is a 4-mana artifact that has pay 1 generic and tap it. Acorn Catapult deals 1 damage to target creature or player. That creature's controller or that player puts a 1/1 green squirrel creature token onto the battlefield. So now that we're sub 5,000, we are getting to the more janky cards, but that's what we're here for. This is, I'd say, the most limiting card so far in terms of the number of creature tokens you can create, because it costs 1 mana and it requires you to tap it. So unless you have an untap outlet, this is going to be limited to 1 new, I guess, token every single turn cycle. But this does work well in pink strategies. Taiwakin Perfect Shot is actually the 3rd most played commander for this. It is a recurring token generator nonetheless, so for 1 mana you can create a creature token every single one of your turns. After Chatterfang, of course, that is the most popular commander playing this, because this does create squirrel tokens. This also works well with the odd Acorn gang too. And one other use case that I think is really unique is Rona Herald of Invasion. So when Rona flips, it says, whenever a source deals damage to you, exile a card from their hand at random. If it's a land, you put it under your control. If not, you cast it for free. So this card can ping Rona for 1, and then you cast something for free from your hand, at random. That's pretty cool. I haven't ever seen anyone do that, but I think that would be a fun thing to try out. Alright, our last card today is Homarid Spawning Bed, which is in only 491 total decks. This is an enchantment that costs 2 blue, and it says pay 1 generic and 2 blue, sacrifice a blue creature to put X Homarid tokens into play, where X is the casting cost of the sacrificed creature. Treat those tokens as 1/1 blue creatures. Come on now, you can't tell me that you would not have fun playing this card or seeing someone else throw it onto the battlefield. It's only in 491 decks, so it's probably one of those cards that you may see in 1 game ever and probably never see anyone play it again. I think this would be a really fun one to try out in an Essex Fractal Bloom deck or in a Braids Conjurer Adept deck. Essex, because this could easily create 6, 7, 8, 9 tokens, and instead of creating the 1/1s, you could make a copy of any creature on the board. And Braids, of course, because that's a commander to cheat out said 8, 9, 10 mana creatures. But yeah, has anyone ever played this or seen anyone play this in a real game? If so, how was it? And yeah, now I just want to figure out a deck to slot this in. That is all that I had today. That was, I think, the longest video that I've created today on this unpopular card series. But I had a fun time researching and finding cards for this. Comment below if there are any topics that you'd like to see a video on. And just like I did for this video, I will pin a comment and turn that into a video to add to this series. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here. If you did see something you want to buy today, like I said, please do consider buying from the affiliate link. But if not, I do appreciate you all being here, and hopefully we'll see you next time.